Welcome to American Pulse. Today, I'm honored and happy to have two great lawyers, and I see that uh, Mr. Jeremy Alters, who's the chief strategist at the Berman Law Group, took the initiative and started this whole thing. And I have my dear friend George Sorio, who is a partner at Lucas and Compton, working hand to hand with the Berman Law Group to try to get this Chinese, I would say, problem or scam to be taken care of and get the interest for the American people back after the outbreak of the coronavirus. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your time. So, Mr. Alters, as I mentioned before the recording, I'm very impressed with your resume and all the work you've done over the years. I'm actually shocked with the amount of money that you recovered for your clients, $4.5 billion, right, over the years?
More like 5.5 billion, but somewhere in that range, yes.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
I think my resume is a little behind, but yes.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I think you're about to embark a new couple of trillions, add them to your portfolio. So here's the thing. I wanted you to explain to my viewers, how did you come up with this? Where did you start? Where did you get the idea? And why did you take the initiative?
It was crystal clear sometime in the middle of March, right around March 10th or 11th, that there was an ongoing problem in China that was starting to spread around the world. And we were actually, Matthew Moore, the lead attorney who wrote the lawsuit, and I were together in Las Vegas at our office, and we were watching the Pac-12 basketball tournament, and we're sitting in the middle of the game. My son plays for one of the Pac-12 teams, and they come on the screen and they say, no fans will be allowed at tomorrow night's game. And my son's team happened to win the game. And the next morning, we were excited to go to the game, and all games were canceled. That was the day the NBA canceled. So I started looking into very quickly with Matthew what in the world was going on. And at the same time, Russell Berman and Ted Berman from the Berman Law Group, the guys who founded the firm, called us and said, we really think we should sue China. This is getting very bad. And I said, I'm watching all of these young men in tears because they can't live out what they've worked so hard for all these years, especially the seniors. And this seems wrong. And Matthew and I walked outside in Las Vegas, and the streets were literally empty. And they had been somewhat empty because of the talk and the conversation about it, but they had gone to literally empty. And at that moment, we realized we had to do it. And Matthew, who I mentioned is the lead lawyer, I'm the chief strategist. I am non-attorney spokesperson. I'm a former lawyer, don't practice anymore. I retired, and they brought me out of retirement for this. And, we came up with the idea with Russell and Ted, and it's become quite an undertaking. And I believe it's the right thing to do at the right moment. And we feel that success will bring justice for Americans all over the country and try to bring China to account for what they've done. And that's the purpose of it. And that's why we filed it. And look, at the end of the day, the bottom line is, without question, China lied and people died. And the people continue to die. We're over 61,000 people now. We did not anticipate that when we filed this lawsuit on March 12th, but it has become reality, and a very tragic and sad reality.
George, I would like to ask you, how do you feel about the fact that China lied about this whole outbreak? And had we known earlier, do you think we could have contained this?
I think there's no doubt, Michael, that had we known earlier, we could have done a much better job. We could have been proactive. We could have put measures into place that actually prevented people who were infected or coming from infected areas from traveling throughout the world. I think without question, no matter where you sit when looking at this issue, there's no doubt, I think everybody would agree, irrespective of what side of the coin you may be on, that had we had the facts, had we had proper, honest information from China, we'd be sitting in a very different situation right now, and the world would have undoubtedly been spared of this carnage. So for me personally, my background, Michael, this is really not something that I have a lot of experience with, but when I had the call from Ted Berman, who is a friend of mine, and he outlined what he was doing and what his firm and Jeremy were endeavoring to achieve. I felt a strong moral obligation to get involved and do everything I could, A, to get the facts out, and ultimately to hold China accountable for unleashing this terror against the entire world.
Jeremy, how do you see this partnership between your law firm, Berman Law Group, and the Lucas Compton firm? How do you see this helping in the process?
Well, so far it has been a synergy of like minds from different sides of the political aisle. Matthew and I and the Bermans, particularly Matthew and I, are liberal Democrats, and we don't know the other side of the aisle. And George, I know, has known President Trump for quite a long time and worked with him for, I think, 19 years. We've been doing this now for over a month, and the synergy has been amazing. The bipartisan effort has been fantastic, and it has resulted in the movement of people toward this goal. And to me, when you can forget about red Republican and blue Democrat, and you can focus on American and unite Americans behind a common cause, that is when you find success. There is power in the movement of people when they move together. And I think that's what's happening here. And I think that George and Travis and the Lucas Compton firm, Vin and the rest of them have brought together with us unity that the country needs at a time just like this, unity that the world actually needs at a time like this, to unite against a common cause, or unite for a common cause against a common enemy, to recover for what has happened. And Lucas Compton has helped us tremendously in doing that. And we look forward to a long-term relationship with them, not just on this case, which will last quite a while, but on other things that we do as well. It's really been great.
That's very well. Go ahead, Mike.
No, please, please.
I think that's very well said, Jeremy. And again, what I've said in the past, it isn't about partisan politics. This is a bipartisan effort. If you look at just the individuals from both sides that are involved, it's something unique. Jeremy, with his background, you have Joe Biden's brother, Francis, as part of the Berman Law Group. Obviously, my relationship with President Trump and the family. But what we're doing here transcends politics. And as I've said before, I think it really is a paradigm for how I would hope Congress and the other nations of the world all collaborate on the same thing. This is really about assisting humanity at a time where it really needs the help.
Jeremy, I read the description, brief description of the lawsuit and some of the press releases that you folks had put out. And I was wondering, there's talks out there that, we can't get anywhere with this because of the Sovereign Immunity Act. And so this is a two-way question. So whether the Immunity Act will, the Sovereign Immunity Act will be a hurdle on this, and whether you think that the Congress should pass a new legislation similar to JASTA to help in the process.
Well, as you can imagine, I have a lot to say on this.
Yes.
So let me start with a track where there are people running in a race. The race starts with against China, the People's Republic of China, and that race has hurdles in front of it. The Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act are those hurdles. The Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act says that a country cannot be sued for actions that were conducted at its discretion, meaning discretionary functions, okay? So there are exceptions to that. One of them is a non-tort commercial business exception, and one is a commercial activity exception. Our case against the People's Republic of China falls directly into both of those exceptions. There is evidence that this was a commercial activity, that multiple commercial activities occurred, so we would fall into the exceptions. But I would argue very strongly that the FSIA does not apply at all. And the reason I would argue that is that what China did, what the government of China did, and I want to be very, very clear, we are not blaming the people of China. The people of China are victims just like we are. We are blaming the government officials who purposefully failed to contain this virus and purposefully silenced those who were trying to speak the truth and purposely failed to tell us about all of the problems that were going to occur and about the genome sequence and everything else. So in our minds, that is not a discretionary function. That is an intentionally reckless act that has caused this pandemic to spread worldwide. So we don't think it falls into the FSIA at all because of that. But of course, the FSIA governs the law, and we will have to clear those hurdles in court to get there, and we believe that we will do that. But secondly, and maybe even more interestingly, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is not a government entity. They are not a country. They are a political party that controls the government of China. They have their own independent and separate constitution. You can analogize it to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party in the United States with much, much, much more power. Xi Jinping is the leader of the Communist Party, and he's the leader of China. Same leader. The Chinese Communist Party dictates in many ways what the government does. The Chinese Communist Party is the group that made certain that people didn't speak the truth on this virus. The Chinese Communist Party is the group that controlled the lab where this virus came from. The Chinese Communist Party is the group that spewed propaganda about this virus not being a big deal and about how it was isolated. All of that turned out to be lies. We have a direct and clear path on that very same track, but with no hurdles at all to clear against the Chinese Communist Party. They are an independent body that has nothing to do with the ownership or the province of the country. So we feel that that will be a clear and direct path to the Chinese Communist Party.
George, the inclination of the administration, of the current administration under President Trump, is to go after the evidence whether China had lied about the outbreak or they withheld valuable and important information. What's your take on that, and how do you see this helpful to the case of the Berman Law Group?
Well, to be clear from the outset, I have to acknowledge that I don't speak on behalf of the president. I'm not a part of the administration, but I think I can comment on what you made reference to and what we're seeing every day in the news.
Yes.
You know, over the past month, I think it's been difficult to really talk about the concept of accountability when you still have the issue in a flare-up stage. Every day we turn on the TV, we hear about people dying, we hear about the horrible things, we see the statistics. But I think that now, at least I'm optimistic that we've hit somewhat of a turning point where things are starting to improve. We can see the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. I think what you're seeing from the administration now, and you're also seeing it from Congress and many others, is how did we get into this mess? Who's going to pay for this? How are we going to compensate people that have suffered, nations that have suffered, businesses that have suffered? So you're starting to see the whole concept of accountability, which by the way, we've been talking about for weeks now, but you're starting to see that concept of how are we going to hold the Chinese government accountable? I think there's no question where the problem came from. But how are we going to resolve it? And in my view, there are multiple tracks. The U.S. Congress is going to pursue one track. The administration will pursue another track. The nations of the world will pursue another track. But at the end of the day, the only mechanism to compensate the individual who lost a loved one, the individual who lost a friend, the individual whose company went out of business and may never recover, the only way to compensate these people that have been injured without doing anything, is through civil litigation. So that's where our lawsuits come into play. And again, we've now been approached by 47 different nations. We have tens of thousands of individual plaintiffs. We're looking towards forming a global coalition. And without going into any details at this point, we are communicating and making our positions and providing information about what we've learned We're working with the White House. We've been approached and are actively working with members of Congress, again, on both sides of the aisle, because collectively, we need to have a united front to exert maximum pressure on the government of China. And that's really what it's about here. And we are honored and proud to be part of that collective effort.